Hi there, and welcome to the Mindful Messenger Show, brought to you today by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. My name is Amanda Johnson, and today we are talking to Torey Ivanic about owning your story and preventing sexual abuse. Torey, founder of Open Space, is a holistic health consultant, mastermind facilitator, and author who helps change agents and catalysts live authentic, intentional, healthy lives with purpose and connection. She's also a wife and mom who gets outside and plays in the open space as often as possible. Her unique experience as a physician assistant and homeopath compelled her to seek justice and prevent further abuse at the hands of her perpetrator. Through her healing journey, open spaces have nourished and soothed her soul. Outdoor spaces such as mountains, oceans, or fields or flowers, and indoor spaces such as yoga studios, therapist office, writing retreats, and self-development programs have worked together to enable and empower Torey to heal her body, mind, and soul, and now step into owning her story and becoming part of the solution. So welcome, Torey. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. It's nice to be here.
Thanks for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you. We have so much to talk about, and we could go in so many directions, but let's start with when did you start thinking about writing this book? First of all, show the book, because I know it's like newly in your hands and it's super exciting. Yeah.
It's super exciting. It's been so good to hold it in my hands. So yes, it's been fun. And it's just a proof, but we're getting there. So July 31st, yeah. So what led me to write?
Yeah, what inspired you? Like, when did you first think, oh, I need to write a book, or maybe it was just tell my own story?
Yes. Well, ever since I was little, there was like, I need to do two things in my life. I need to have children and I need to write a book. So now I'm 42 almost, and I will have done all those things. So now I get to make more things on my list.
Nice.
But really the book really came into like, yes, I need to do this in 2015. And that was after two things kind of happened right around the same time that made me think, wow, this is a really powerful story and I need to share it more. So the first thing that happened, I had been attending a church, which I hadn't been attending a church for many years. And so I'd been attending a church for a year and a half or so. And the worship leader at that church was arrested on multiple crimes, very similar to my own experience. And he was the same age that my perpetrator had been when I was abused. And he was right in my midst, singing about Jesus. And my kids had never been with him, but just the fact that, that was going on and none of my radar wasn't strong enough to pick up on that. So that ripped the Band-Aid off in a big way. And so I started sharing more about my story because it was really fresh in my head. And I shared with two different individuals who at the time didn't tell me exactly their stories, but could relate to mine, and then went forward to the police with theirs. And when they shared that with me, that they had gone and made a police report based on my story, it really just solidified for me, like, this is a powerful story. And if I share it more, maybe I can really make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's shifted over time, right? Like initially it was like, how can I empower women to tell their own stories and potentially pursue legal prosecution, but also just this whole prevention thing. So tell us a little bit about the story that you have in the book and where you see the message going from here.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So the story, like just the story itself, is I was a 15-year-old gymnast, and a girl on my team, another gymnast on the team, had been being sexually violated by our coach. At that age, I called it, they were together, right? It was not in my, right. In my 15-year-old brain, I just knew that they were together, and I assumed they were sleeping together. I don't know that was ever said, but another teammate told me that they were together. So I knew for sure. And then that was probably at least a year and a half or two, maybe, before he kissed me. But he had talked to me and groomed me for multiple years and talked about sex and commented on my body and had these little stories he would tell me that he could say a word and it wasn't a sexual word, but I knew the story behind it. So little, inside jokes and innuendos. So to make a very long story short, just a couple months between in the spring of 92, he violated me. And one time with my teammate. So the two of us were both there. We both witnessed each other's abuse. So then he moved away. So it just kind of removed him. And he was in a different state, and I stayed in touch with him, and we wrote letters. So I actually had letters in my hand that described the abuse, and I hung on to them for 15 years. And when I was 30, I called off an engagement, and I said to myself, something is wrong with me. And I started seeing a male therapist, and I intentionally sought out a male because I thought, it seems like all my issues are with men, and maybe I should go to a man to see if maybe that'll help. And so I had been to a couple therapists before, but never had really gotten much out of it. And I just laid it all out there for this guy. So the third time I went to see him, I actually brought the 2 or 3 letters that were most incriminating, if you will. And I dropped them off to him, and I let him read them as I ran away to the bathroom. And I came back in, and he said, tell me more about these. Who are they from? How old were you? You know? And so he said, I need to make a CPS report. Now, at this time, I was a mandated reporter. I was a physician assistant, and I couldn't necessarily apply my knowledge about that system and the legality of it to myself. My own story, I kept saying it just wasn't that big of a deal. And partly because my teammate had been being raped, and I was never raped. And so that trauma comparison was easy for me to do. Like, what happened to me just was nothing compared to what happened to many of my girlfriends that I knew and knew their stories. But around that same time that I called off that engagement, he ended up moving back to our hometown. So the gymnasts from our old gym were going to see him as a chiropractic patient or as a physician assistant patient, right? So he could be doing genital exams, legally with his licenses. And I just thought to myself, not on my watch, man. Like, I cannot let this continue. Or, hopefully it's not, right? Like, your hope is he never did it again after me, right? So that just led to me reaching out to my old teammate to see how she was doing. And we had these very parallel lives, almost eerily. We both owned houses. We both had big Labradors. We both had jobs that we liked, but neither one of us had a really good functional relationship. And so I kind of am a take the bull by the horns type person. So I researched how long the statute of limitations was and what the protocol would be if we were going to report and all those kind of things. And I met with my girlfriend just to reconnect in September. And a few weeks later, we went to the police and made that police report. And the coolest thing about that month, September of 2006, is we both met our husbands that same month. And I introduced her to hers. And so it was like just owning that truth enough and writing that police report freed us immensely. So
amazing. It's amazing. And the end of the story is you guys put him away for a very, very, very long time.
We did. As when we made our police report, and then I did a tapped phone call, but then it took about 7 months before another woman came forward, because our report was old, it was 15 years old, and the prosecuting attorney was on maternity leave, and I'm sure the stack on her desk was this high, and so she, it wasn't a priority until a woman from his chiropractic office came forward. And then they said, oh, wait a second, we know this name. And so when they brought him in to talk to him about the report that had been made against him, they talked to him for a couple hours, and then they dropped our reports on the table. And what the detective told me was that he broke down crying and said whatever they said is true. So he was arrested that night. And the other crazy ironicness of that night specifically, my dad, just the day before, had been life-flighted to the hospital back in Ohio where this all took place. And so I had flown home and was sleeping on my teammate's couch when our coach was arrested, and woke up the next morning to the front page of our local paper saying, chiropractor arrested for sex crimes.
This is why I love my job, is because I get to hear stories like this that are like, not just amazing stories of humans who have been significantly or extremely traumatized, overcoming that in some way, but like it's going to make me cry. Like being able to see the higher orchestration that's going on behind all of it, like the timing that it would be that many years later and that all those things would happen at the perfect time for you guys to be together, to support each other, I mean, it's just, it blows me away all the time.
Absolutely.
Never get over it.
Absolutely. I mean, there were so many divinely timed things. One being her date of birth. Her date of birth was a certain day. If she had been born one day later, the statute of limitations wouldn't have been as long. So just like freakishly weird things that were like so in alignment to make this happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And all those things are like really helpful when you're doing something as hard as
absolutely
with your story and having to tell it in front of a jury.
Very, very confirming, yes, that we are doing the right thing. Yeah.
So I want to go back to kind of the beginning, because I'm assuming that the people who are going to be watching this are probably people who have experienced this themselves or know someone, right? Because we all kind of know someone. I remember at one point, I think I was like 15 years old. I remember sitting around a table with a bunch of my friends and hearing them talk about something. And I remember thinking, every single one of my friends has been abused by a family member. Isn't that weird? I mean, those numbers can't be right, you know? So I'm sure that if they haven't experienced it and want to be on a healing journey, they know someone. And so, and more to the point, maybe they're parents of little kids who are involved in sports. And so I want to kind of get into that conversation about how this got started. Like,
absolutely,
how is it possible that this happens? And that parents don't see? Like, what are they not seeing? What are they not looking for? Like, let's help people out with that piece of the story.
Okay. So really one of the things I think that to some degree still terrified me about my story before I wrote the book was I don't know what anybody could have done to prevent it, because he was such a good manipulator and groomer. But the things that my teammate and I share in common were divorced parents. So parents that weren't maybe as in touch with their children or on the same page, communicating back and forth about where their children were or who they were with or how they were spending their time as parents who are together. So I guess if I have one word of advice for everybody who has children is try not to get divorced. But
that shows another like relationship dynamic, right? So whatever that relationship dynamic is what was modeled to the kid. So.
Right. Yeah. And so we could dive into all of that, but we're going to leave that because that's just, yes, that's a definite, like, set you up for something. But the way that he groomed me was, it started very subtly. I can remember the first time that I told him I loved him because he told me I had to. So I was standing on a platform. It was 4 feet higher than him. He was very big. He was a bodybuilder. So he was about 220 pounds, 6 foot something. I don't know. I was like, you know, I'm still 5'2". So when I was 12, I was probably, I don't know, 4'8". And so I was this tiny little person, and he was catching us and spotting us, and he could hold me in one hand above his head. And he would do that just for fun, you know, and we thought it was fun. But looking back on it now, I'm like, what an interesting little power trip, you know, to be able to know that he could hold me in his hand. And so gymnastics is a very hands-on sport. You know, you're being touched by your coach all the time. You're wearing next to nothing, a bathing suit, basically. You're used to being touched by your coach. And so it was very gradual. And, you know, obviously it's been 25 years now. It's hard to remember all the, like, how it happened. But I remember that time where he was like, you can't get down from the platform until you tell me you love me. And I was a total smart ass. And I was like, I'm not saying that, you know, and I kept being sassy and talking back to him. And finally I was just like, fine, I love you, you know, and then let me jump down. But that was the starting point, right? That tipping point of like, fine, I'll just do what you say. And then it was more verbal than anything for probably at least a year and a half of just like, hey, your abs look nice. Can I touch your abs? You know, and then, you know, just these ways of just getting more and more intimate. He used to tell me, you know, how smart I was and how beautiful I was, and, you know, just really building me up, you know, making me trust him, and telling me he loves me all the time, you know, and how smart and beautiful and blah, 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 you know, so just really gaining my trust to the point.
And this is happening while your life is falling apart in the background, right?
In
So
my
it's like
life. Yeah.
your foundation is gone in some way. And then
Yeah.
there's this one person who you respect, who literally catches you when you fall, and they're saying all these amazing things to you. Like,
Absolutely. And, you know, gymnastics at that level, I was level 8 when I got on his team. 20 hours a week was nothing in the gym. You know, I was probably with him more than I was with any other adult. I was definitely with him more than I was with any other adult. And, you know, there's plenty of time in between events, in the back, in the drinking fountain. The vault line was one that was really easy, right, for him to say things that he didn't want other people to hear, because all the gymnasts are at the back of the line and he's the only one down at the vault. And so it got to the point where I remember him spotting me, and I did something called a soothed, and he would flip over and he would catch me and his hand would graze my chest. And then he'd like talk to me at the end and he'd be like, I was just trying to get some during practice. You know, just blatant, but there wasn't anybody to hear him, you know? And I would laugh it off, because what do you do?
what the hell else are you going to do?
What are you going to do? Yeah. Like, I'm not going to go tell my mom he said that. Like, I loved him too, right? At that point, he was somebody I relied on so much for support and love and, you know, all these things, to the point that a few years ago when I went home and I was digging through home junk in my high school stuff, I found, I think it was my junior or senior year, so he was already gone, not in my life physically anymore. And it was a journal writing. You have 20 minutes to free write. And the question was, who do you admire most in your life? All about him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the important thing is, like, first of all, like, what I'm hearing is, like, pay attention to who has access to your children, because I think some of us just drop our kids off at school or drop them off at youth group, or, you know, and there's no, like, we just make assumptions. Well, of course, I mean, this is an organization, or this is a doctor, or this is like all these professionals who they're already elevated by the adults, and then especially the children.
Yep.
And, you know, I've even had times in the very recent past where I've gone in doctor's offices and some guy walked in for my exam, and the energy that I felt was like, oh, you know, and that was my opportunity to be like, you out, find me someone else. Did I?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I watched myself like struggle with, like, well, is that my place? And what am I gonna, you know, this only happens once every 5 years. Like, oh, it's no big deal. It's right?
No big deal.
Most
Yep.
excruciating, horrible experience I've ever had in a medical office, because I didn't listen to the voice that said, tell him to leave.
Yeah.
Like, but it's all those little moments, right? Because it's a doctor. They know what they're doing. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so the grooming is like the time, the touch, the words of, you know, this weird, I think one of the things that I've seen, because again, I have so many friends, like, there's this weird duality that happens. And I'm not sure it happens so much in your story, but in a lot of others, it's like this elevation of their self-confidence, like, oh my God, you're so amazing. And it really like fills you up and makes you feel so good. But then there are like these moments where they will cut them down, like significantly, like rob them of their emotions, or, you know, treat them, like really mistreat them. And it's this strange, like, well, you know, everyone's human, but that's really weird. Like, that's really out of character.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting for me, I don't remember too much of that, but I remember one incident where, I don't know, I was crying. I must have had a bad meet or whatever. I was really upset, but I don't maybe I was just having a lot of attitude. I don't know, but he picked me up by the shoulders and kind of shook me. And he said, he was like aggravated. And he was like, sometimes I just want to throw you through a wall. Like, so I remember that, but that's the only thing I remember that was like, ooh, he's scary. You know, well, that's not true. Now that I think about it, like, this is interesting because none of this stuff is even in the book, right? But he used to carry a gym bag and had a gun in it. And we knew about this. Like, why do we know that our gymnastics coach has a gun? Like, or I know, right? So maybe myself and my teammate that were close to him. And then he had some kind of scar on his stomach, and it was some kind of, like, there were some shady stories and things that I was like, that doesn't really go along with what I know of you, who's this religious, God-fearing, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't swear, like, perfect guy that most people referred to as Mr. Wonderful, you know? So there were these, little idiosyncrasies and like, well, why do you need to carry a gun? Why are you afraid somebody's going to come hurt you? Like, what's going on with that? And who knows, right?
Yeah, all those weird little like power dynamic things. And sometimes they don't even have to lay hands on you. It can just be like a death stare. Like,
for sure.
And I'm bigger than you, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, I mean, if you would have asked me at the time, I never would have said, oh, I'm afraid of him, or he's coercing me. You know what I mean? Like, I was 15, and that was the oldest I was when I was in that with him. And it was years before that just like, I loved him. That's what I knew, you know? But the part that I really struggled with in my head was the fact that he was with my teammate. Like, if he loves her, if he loves me, why is he sleeping with her? And then the year before any abuse happened with me, he got married, right? So he's married. And then by the time he kissed me, he was married, had a child. I knew he was sleeping with my teammate, and then I'm into it. And so that was like the biggest letter, was that, like, me writing to him and saying, you love me so much. What's all this about? You know, and his explanation of that was pretty fascinating. And it's now criminal evidence, which is good.
Yeah. It's amazing how it can happen. So like, I was thinking about, you know, having kids, like, starting to pay attention. Like, I remember, one day my son came home from school, and it was the last day he went to that school. Cause what he said was like, my teacher lost her crap today. And he was 7 maybe, but it was like such a volatile, out of character incident that it stunned him enough that he would share it with me. But he was like, she threw a stapler against the wall when she got mad at a kid. And I was like, out of the school, like, done, right? Because, you know, I'll do that for my kid. I didn't do it for myself in the exam office a few months ago, but we'll do it for our kid, you know? So like, how are the adults in your life behaving there? You know, like, are they acting cool? Or, because I know a lot of times, you know, like what you're talking about, the like esteeming someone and having a lot of admiration for them, like, you can hear, whenever I hear girls going on and on and on and on about a teacher or a mentor, I'm like, I remember feeling that way about some of those folks. So I know what that's about.
Yeah.
Right. Did you do that? We didn't talk about that. Were you talking about him a lot too?
I can't imagine that I wasn't, you know, like, so I had a boyfriend, my first ever boyfriend at that time too. I had been dating him for maybe like a year when the abuse happened. And so he has been an amazing resource for me on my, like, demeanor and things. Like, when I went to the police 12 years ago, he shared with me, like, just, I knew something was going on, but if I had like called you out on it, you would hate me because you had such a connection to him. And I totally hear that. Like, and honestly, you know, I would have hated him. I would have been so angry if he would have called me out or her, like, all of it. Like, it wasn't something I could have handled. And he didn't tell me at the time, like, I think something's going on there, but like, yeah, he knew that something wasn't right. And we spent a ton of time with him outside the gym. Like, we went to a concert with him, like the two of us, my teammate and I went to a concert with him one night. I remember going to that and just like parties outside of the gym and stuff. I mean, like I kind of always wanted to hang out with him, you know, like if I could stay late, come in early, all that kind of stuff, I was doing it. And, you know, I mean, you want your kid to have a healthy adult mentor in their life. So I'm sure my mom and dad and stepdad were just like, that's great. You know, gymnastics is really good for her. She's a great athlete, blah, 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 you know, but I don't know. And those are the things that I think it still to some degree terrifies me. But having two children and one being a female, and not to delineate, like there's plenty of men have been abused too. And one of the two who I shared my story with was a male who went forward to the police. So like, I will use female a lot, but what I mean is any victims. But my children, I have a boy and a girl, they're 7 and 5, 7 and 6 now. And I think the thing that I'm most like clear about that maybe my parents weren't, you know, we talk about bodies, we talk about the actual names for our genitalia, we talk about where we should and shouldn't take off our clothes, who can tell us what to do with our bodies, who should be touching our bodies with, you know, if our parents are there, it's okay if a doctor's looking, but like we don't show, you know, all that stuff, that conversation is very, very open in our house. Not to say that that's necessarily going to prevent it, but I do feel like I've empowered my children to own their bodies and that they are in control of this. And kids are still going to experiment and all that, and I get that, but this new statistics or the whatever statistics, the current ones, are mostly 50% of the acts are child on child. And so, you know, with the onset of pornography and the internet, and we just have a whole different world to navigate than the world that I grew up in the, you know, 80s and 90s. So I've done two things here in Denver that I really appreciated. One was something called the Parenting Safe Children Workshop. And it is all about that, the boss of your body, teaching your kid, you know, all those kind of things that they can do to prevent, but also parents being responsible, parents going and saying to the coach, to the teacher, to the principal, what are you doing on this team, in this school, in this kindergarten, classroom, whatever, to prevent sexual violation. And just by saying that to a perpetrator, they're not touching your kid. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, what? She just said sexual violation. And so that was really fun to just like think about, like, oh my gosh, I can terrify somebody just by asking that question. So it might not stop them from ever perpetrating, but if more of us get comfortable with just asking that one question, we will do a lot of good. The other thing that I did was something called Impact Personal Safety of Colorado, and they have an empowered family class. And it puts children into these adrenalized scenarios and teaches them to speak up. And they're very big on no secrets. No secrets. I don't care who the person is. I don't care if it's your uncle or your grandfather or your father. Nobody keeps secrets from you and I, you know. And so that was really good. And to watch my little 5-year-old at the time just kick some guy in the groin when he picked her up was so awesome. So awesome. And so I will continue to do those types of things with my children. But I think really my point with this book and with like putting my story so out there is that if we're not talking about it, if we're not having conversations like this one, we are not changing the societal beliefs that it's not that big of a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or on the other side of it, you have a movement that is driven by a lot of people who haven't done a significant amount of healing. And so in all of their fear and resentment, they are doing things to our kids that are very disempowering. You know, I think I shared with you one of the videos of a friend of mine who was interviewing her 13-year-old son who was in sex ed class, and some sex prevention teacher or sexual abuse prevention educator came in, you know, those people that they hire to come in. And she was like, yeah, you know, half of you boys will be perpetrators by the time you're. And so this little boy, thank God he had a mom who was present enough at the dinner table to notice that he wasn't acting his normal chipper self and knew how to ask questions and knew how to probe without pushing him off. And he was like, yeah, I didn't like the way I felt. I felt like she just told me that I'm going to hurt girls and I don't want to do that. But there's no conversation of what does a healthy relationship look like?
Right.
So without helping kids define what those lines are, and not just like, these are the lines abstractly, but this is how it feels in your body. When someone touches you and you have this feeling, that's when you can say this.
Yes.
You know, like there's no connecting the dots.
Yes. Yeah. An empowered family is all about that intuition part of it. That how do you feel in your stomach? How do you feel in your gut? Because you can trust your body to tell you what's right and what's wrong, you know? And for me, it's like, you know, I'm a product of my environment too. And I'm trying to, you know, peel the layers to the onion while I'm doing all of this. And I hear myself say to my daughter, you know, don't pet the dog before you ask the owner, you know? And I was like, wow, extrapolate that out to teenage boys and verbal consent. And like, why can't we teach this next generation? Just ask before you hug someone, you know? And so one thing I love is that my daughter and son both had the same kindergarten teacher, and she's been teaching consent from day one in her kindergarten classroom. You know, when you come in the door, it's okay to hug me. That's a hugging time. It's open, free reign. Any other time of the day that you want to hug me, just ask first. So teaching them to ask each other before they hug each other. And it's as easy as that. You know, you think of the uncle that just picks up the little girl and snuggles her all up and stuff. But if she's pushing away and we, you know, say, no, go kiss grandpa or go kiss grandma or whatever, we have to change that thinking. We have to change that talking to our children about, oh, don't make your grandpa feel bad and not give him a hug. Like, you're just telling them not to listen to their gut and listen to their intuition.
Yep.
So, and I'm not necessarily guilty of that, but I'm definitely guilty of some things where I'm like, oh gosh, I wish I would have done that differently already.
For sure. Yeah. Well, my mom used to joke when I told her that I was really drunk, like it was the only time I've ever been smashed in my entire life. When my son was conceived, she was like, he's probably fine. Most of the population is probably conceived under those circumstances. But that feeling that you have, that guilty feeling, that's what motherhood is all about. And I was like, oh, that is so crappy, but it's true. Cause you know, we get better and then we know that we could have done better.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I think the difference is, you know, and we were talking about this even before we started recording, like generationally, we're at a time now where this conversation can take place, right? There are enough statistics, there are enough people coming forward, there are enough. And one of the things that I was sharing is like, because I have all of these friends that I've seen go through this and I've asked them like about their stories and family histories and stuff, it's like, one of the things that I see is that there's this generation where this stuff happened to them on the continuum, right? Like there's the minor, no big deal stuff that happens, which still is a big deal, but then there's like all the way up to being raped, right? And so along this continuum, the parents, especially the mothers, were abused and never said anything. And then never said anything. Like, what if their mom had said, you know, this happened and this was the time where it started to feel really icky and this is what I wish I would have done?
Yeah.
They maybe could have avoided a lot of that pain just by, you know, my mom wishes she would.
Owning their own pain to prevent it in their children. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's hard. It's hard to watch that. So there was the grooming, and then, so let's talk a little bit about this process of actually writing the book, because, first of all, it was really fun because you came to my first 7-day retreat and we're there virtually because you have little ones. But I remember this one day, I want to say it was like day 5 or something, and you're writing, and, you know, as the facilitator, like I'm reading the room, right? So, you know, Abby's got some hard stories. Mary's got some, you know, like these people have some hard stories, but Torey, she's the one I need to keep my eye on, because when she starts to tap into these old feelings and stuff, like that's kind of how I was thinking. And then I remember like day 1 or 2 of the writing, you were like, oh my God, I'm having so much fun. And I was like, what? So talk about that. Like, what was the process of, because I know you tried writing the book a few times before we worked together. So tell us a little bit about that process of trying to figure out how to do this, because you have been through it. Just in the last year, you have been through it when it comes to being in legal stuff. So share your wisdom.
So, okay. Amanda and I met in the spring of 2015, and that's right when the whole worship leader thing happened. And so then we did this 7-month business development / personal development thing together. So that's how I met Amanda and you. Sorry, I'm talking to you, but I'm talking to somebody else too. And I knew from the start, like just when we had a small conversation, I was like, she's my person. And the fact that you were a writing coach, and there were multiple other kind of writing coaches in our group, but we had one phone conversation at least where I was just like, oh my gosh, she totally gets it. And so then that following fall, November of that year, I decided, I don't know if I can write this book. I don't know if I have enough content is basically what I didn't know, if I had enough details and memory. And so on November 1st, I started writing, and I started with a letter to my perpetrator one day, and then a healing modality that I used, like something about that the next day. So for me, I needed to keep it out of the negative. Like, I just didn't want it to be all like down in this story, because I feel like I have done so many things to get out of that victim mindset. And so the letters to him were actually really therapeutic, just in being able to say to him what I never got to say to him. And writing to him, I was like writing to him in jail, basically, and I didn't mail any of them, but it was really good. And then the healing things, like I found nature and skiing and rock climbing and all these things extremely healing for me. So writing about that process and how rock climbing made me feel, and how it gave me this sense of freedom and strength and courage and bravery and all these things, like keeping myself on that just a little outside my comfort zone place all the time. So that November, I think I wrote like 20 some days. And it gave me the like, okay, I've got enough. Yes, I could write a book out of this. And so I probably had a couple conversations with you, and you were doing retreats, but like my life was, little kids and a husband that worked lots of hours. And I was like, that's never going to happen. But in January, I took December off. Let's do Christmas without this in my head. And then January, I started writing again. And I started writing it more in what I thought would be like the timeline of the book. But it just like, I had never written a book before, and I didn't really know how to put my own voice into it, really. It was more like this happened and this happened and this happened, and it wasn't immersed. And so when you had that retreat, and it was April of last year, 2017, and it was amazing because it was day one, really, when you started, like I figured out how I was going to write it, like really after I told you and we talked about it, it was like, I see it now. Okay, I can do this now. And so in that 1 week, I got the introduction in the first 5 chapters, like first drafts done. And I felt like, oh my God, this is so clear to me now. Like I can just do this. And so what I did then.
Wait. Before you keep going, we need to explain. You were at home and you were taking significant breaks, because you would like write through a hard thing. And you'd be like, I'm taking a run. See you guys in a few hours. Right. And you had what, 6 hours of time with us a day and then you were going.
I don't know if it was even 6 hours a day. Like I'd jump on for a couple hours in the morning and a couple hours in the evening at most, because I had kids to drop off and pick up and like dinner to make, and all my life was going on around me as you guys were in this nice house in Minneapolis. But even that, I mean, it was hard, but like you gave us these movies to watch as like homework at night, and my husband and I watched them, and it was so nice to just like kick back and like do my homework by sitting on the couch. And it was really good because a couple of those movies were movies I hadn't seen in years. And it was fun to see how differently I viewed the theme or the moral or the, whatever of that story from how I had seen it back in that day, because it was my teenage years maybe that I saw it the first time. So I really felt like I totally revisited my 10-year-old self, my 12-year-old self, my 15-year-old self. Like I was in it to the point of like my verbiage was the same as it would have been then. I did have to call my girlfriends from high school though. This was it was fun because I reconnected with all these people. So I had to call my girlfriends from high school and be like, if I had known that my teammate was sleeping with my coach, how would I have told you that? Like, Would I have said they're doing it? Would I have said they're hooking up? Like, and just talking about that was just funny, you know, like, how do we talk about sex when we were teenagers? Because we didn't say they're having intercourse. That's for sure, you know?
Right.
And yeah, honestly, like the creative process, because I kind of went away from creativity in my career. I was medicine and, you know, this is how you have to do things. And I hadn't written more than, you know, a blog post in, I don't know, 25 years or whatever. So to get into just creative writing about my own story it was so fun to remember like the smells and the sounds and the different songs that would be playing and the crazy permed hair and, you know, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it blew me away because most of the time, and it blew me away because it actually showed me how much of the healing process you'd actually done, right? Because people who haven't done process through a lot of that, when they go back there and they touch on even like in your case, going back into that gym with like the smells and the excitement and the achievement, right? It's still neurologically tied to this other crap that happened.
Yeah.
So, you know, people really, really struggle with that. So, and then you're just a naturally talented writer. So as soon as you saw like, oh, this is how I'm going to do it. And I showed you a few skills, you were like, we're getting it done fast. And you did.
That's exactly how it felt. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is so fun.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, that's really important that people know that the writing doesn't, even on hard stories, you know, it is an opportunity to go back and resolve things and see things from a different place. I mean, were there, like, what happened for you with the characters in your story as you were going through them? Did you have any breakthrough moments of seeing them in ways that you didn't see them before, or?
Well, forgiveness wise, I think I have reached a whole new level, you know, and also empathetically for the people that knew, like that there were the collateral damage is what a friend of mine referred to my ex-boyfriends as. And I feel like that's so true. Like my poor ex-boyfriends, I dated these wonderful men and I just didn't know how, you know, like I didn't know how to be in a healthy relationship. And so when I went back to all those different men, I actually ended up calling every single one of them on the phone and talking to them about this book and how I wanted to put it out there. And I used really detailed, you know, accounts of our relationships because that's the only way I could write it was in my true form of like how I remember it. And they were all mostly very supportive. But the guilt that some of my, you know, friends who knew about it feel to this day, you know, another teammate that was on the team that knew about it. And I think I came to the conclusion around when we went to the police. In fact, my prosecuting attorney, this was kind of a fun story. I was sitting in her office the Saturday before the trial started on Monday, and we were prepping for the trial. And she said, when you made the phone call to him, when you made the tapped phone call, what made you think he would answer the phone? And I just, without hesitation, said, because I knew he still loved me and respected me enough to talk to me. And her jaw went like, and I went, oh, wait. And she was like, you know that he has never loved you or respected you. And I was like, oh. And so that freeing moment allowed me to get up on that stand and read those letters almost laughing because they were that ridiculous. You know, this 30-year-old man writing to a 15-year-old girl and saying how devoted and loving, what, you know, I mean, it was just comical almost. But if I hadn't had that little brain switch before Monday, I think I would have been tearful the whole time up there. And my initial like response to seeing him physically for the first time in probably, I don't know, like 10, 12 years, my first initial gut instinct was to go up and hug him. And so like that stuff you cannot, I do feel like it is absolutely in my body, and like being able to hold this in my hands has kind of removed it from my body. And that is a super cool thing. Even like the difference between on the computer screen and this is huge. So yeah, like there was a lot of that healing and having the conversations. Even like my ex-fiance, I hadn't talked to him in a really long time. And I called you and I was like, I feel like I'm in a 12-step program. Like I have to go like clean up all the streets that I messed up. And, but having a conversation with him and just hearing his perspective on societal views and the way things are moving, and just being able to say to him, if you hadn't asked me to marry you and we hadn't broken off that engagement, I don't think I would have realized there was something wrong with me. You know, I would have just put it on him. Like, I just date these guys that aren't that good. And that like commitment we had made to each other was such an instrumental thing for me, because it took me down when we broke that off. And so I got to say thank you to him for that, you know, in a truly like honest way. It was very cool. And, you know, I think sometimes some things in your past are well enough left alone, you know, but I don't like stay close in friendships with ex-boyfriends. I've been married for 9 years now, which is awesome. But I do think that I had good enough relationships and healthy enough people in my life that I was able to do that, and they were able to hear me, and they really are supportive of it, you know, mostly like, yeah, they can separate themselves from the story. But it really, like that whole other people hanging on to guilt and stuff, that I think is that societal thing where like, we have to understand that we have to let go of that guilt or channel it into a healthy, positive movement forward.
Yeah.
Because me sitting around like feeling bad about or shameful or guilty about what happened with me is not hurting my perpetrator at all. It's only hurting me and all the people around me. So I have to get as clear and as clean about all that stuff as I can, so that I can be a better wife, sister, you know, mother, daughter, all those things. Yeah.
Here's something that I often wonder, especially because I have authors just telling these amazing stories where I'll read, you know, oh God, I can't remember her name right now, but there's a very popular woman who wrote a book about someone who's now her ex-husband, and the amount of detail that she shared that wasn't just her story, but like his story.
Love warrior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, how I wish I could have like had a bird's eye view or been a fly on a wall for that conversation. Like,
I know, I do too. Because I read that book after, so I had a self-publishing package that I purchased before I even wrote the book. I purchased it in January because I was like, at that point I knew I could write it. And I was like, if I put this money on it, then I'll do it. And so it seemed like the right idea. And, you know, it gave me some structure of like, somebody's going to help me, right? Sort of, not really. But then you helped me, and then we got it done. And then I submitted it to them for their content evaluation. And the first time it came back with very, what I consider reasonable requests. Like, the other victim in the case, I need to get her notarized written permission. Done. Understandable, for sure. And then I needed to get them the court documents so they knew that it was like legit, you know, public record stuff. And then a few other people that they wanted permission from. And so I did all that. And I did another like edit, and then I submitted it again, and it came back with a very templated, you know, and you pretty much should take a pen name, is what they kept saying to me. Like, either change every single identity that could be tracked to a person or take a pen name. And I had said from the beginning, I didn't want to take a pen name. I wanted to write this as a nonfiction memoir. And so the second time, that was pretty defeating, and I jumped through their hoops again. And the third time I was like, F this, like, what is happening? So then I started really reaching out to other authors and things like, what is happening here? Like, and I read the Love Warrior book then, and I was like, how can she write this and I can't write mine? And I've heard, you know, maybe she had an agent, maybe that helps and you can get more like insurance coverage or what have you. But to me, like, it's my story. It's not, even if it's personal details about my ex-boyfriend or whoever, it's not their story. They would tell it very differently than I would tell it. And so this is my perspective. And I think that's something that's really good about my book. For some people, they can kind of hear their own thoughts in their own brain when I'm doing my thoughts in my brain. And so it doesn't matter exactly who I was dating or when or all that stuff. But yeah, it was very frustrating to me that I had to kind of keep generalizing things because especially in the initial writing of it, those details were so important, and I could remember so many details. So yeah, that was frustrating and at the same time kind of freeing. So I ended up pulling out of that self-publishing package and doing in a different way, which will, in the long run, if I sell lots of books, make me money. So that's
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's an important thing for people to know. Like, it's one of the things that I'm always asking during some of the workshops that I lead is like, what are your non-negotiables going in? Because, you know, if you have someone like me working with you through the process and someone who like cares about your message deeply, and then you take it and you put it inside of a system with people who don't read it, don't really have an attachment to its success, right? Like, except that it's their job to move it along the conveyor belt.
right.
It starts to have this feeling of like, who is going to care about this as much as I do? And also, if you haven't been through the process of self-publishing, then you don't know what questions to ask. You don't know where your own lines are. Like, I don't know what am I willing to leave out, or whose names am I willing to change, or right, like all those things. People get paralyzed and they just walk away.
Well, and there were points in time, like that first time, the content evaluation I felt really good about. The second one, I was like, wait a second. And I started to realize, because I was kind of frozen, and I was like, oh, they're making me feel shameful about this. That's what's bothering me, is that by them saying, you can't say this, you can't say that, you're invading people's privacy, that made me feel shameful about it again. And then it just got pissed. I was just like, no way, you're not going to make me feel shameful about this story again. And so that was good when I got into my anger about it, because then I could just like bust forward and move through it. But it was really interesting, like the kind of roller coaster ride of, because I mean, really, the manuscript that I have right now was almost exactly this way a year ago. Mm-hmm. And so that has been all just like kind of negotiating these things back and forth and trying to figure things out. But in that year, and I think this is a blessing too, I've let go of a lot of that stuff. Like, honestly, if you gave me another year, I could probably blur out a lot more and not care about it as much. And so I can see how the time was good for me, and I feel a lot better about when I move forward with it, that I've had those conversations with people, because otherwise I wouldn't have had those conversations with some of those people, and I feel much better about it moving forward because of that too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of it's evidence of your healing, but it's also evidence of your intention to perpetuate that healing and create a new conversation, because that's what's required, right? Like, just incredibly uncomfortable conversations. Like, let's just,
absolutely,
talking to your kids about their body parts, uncomfortable. Talking to them about other people touching their body parts, unbelievably, like, no one wants to have these conversations.
Yeah.
So like, let's pull up our big pants and just have really hard conversations. And so I think it was like, it was hard for me to watch, but it was kind of like a good practice round for you, because
right. Well, because if I can have this conversation with all my ex-boyfriends who I still care about deeply, like on some level, I can have it with whoever wants to call me up and talk about it now. Yeah, there's nobody that I would be afraid to talk to about this story anymore. Yeah. And that feels really good. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So one more thing.
Okay.
One of the things that I loved witnessing through your journey was watching your family rally around you. So tell me how that happened. Like, you have this, I mean, and everyone has to pick up this book and read it, because, when I get the opportunity to watch people's stories with people in their lives, like, as they're talking about their development of it, but then I get to witness what that has turned into while they're in the process of writing. It's just such a beautiful thing to watch. So for you, like, how did you get this done in the time frame that you did, with small children and a husband and a business? Like, you're an entrepreneur. So like, kind of the down and dirty, like, how did you set up your own structures? What were some of the ways that you asked for help in that process? And how do people show up?
That's a great question. So after I don't know how I had been writing before I met with you for the retreat, but after the retreat, basically what I had found was if I gave it a 4-hour chunk of time, I could bust out a chapter. And so I booked out every Wednesday for May and June. So eight days. And I think by July, I had the last chapter written. So I think I started with 18 or 20 chapters was the first draft. And then, and so then I had those Wednesday mornings, 4 hours blocked out. And I usually would write for 3 or 4 hours and then just go for a hike or something and turn that off. And it worked really well for me, to just have that one day. And thankfully, I've noticed now there are times that I'm really creative and times that I'm not. And so some of the chapters, I think the first draft at least was just I wasn't in a creative mood that day and I really just couldn't get into it. But I got enough on the paper and the ideas of it, because it really just picking one day and diving into that day, that thing that I remember, made it easy, because even if it was a bad first draft, I could go back at a time where I was more creative and add in what needed to be added in or take out a bunch of stuff. So that's how I did logistically did it. There were definitely times where so I met my husband, literally met my husband, and I was going to the police the next weekend. So he has known this whole story from day one, but it was very infiltrative into our relationship. At first I was very I'm not going to make out with you for 3 weeks at least, and so he, in witnessing this, he has been the most supportive guy I could ever imagine about putting this out there. And if anybody should want me to not publish this, it probably would be him. Mm-hmm. My brother, I shared the story with him, and he searched for his name and read those parts, and that's about it. And he doesn't talk about it much, but he hasn't said to me, I don't want you to publish it or anything like that. I don't think it's something that he's really, wanting to dive into with me, but he was very supportive when I went to the police many years ago. And he actually, this was interesting, because in the time of going to the police, when I started saying, I think I'm going to go make a police report, he said, well, I told you to do that 5 years ago. And I was like, you did? I don't remember that. I probably just, but I do remember saying years before, I have letters that could put him in jail. And I really didn't believe it. You know what I mean? I said the words, but I didn't really believe it. So my brother, I think, has always been supportive and pissed off at him. And my mom's been interesting. And as you say, women from prior generations, I wouldn't be surprised if my mom has her own story, but we haven't gone there yet. When I told my mom I was probably 18 or 19, I was home from college, and I said, and I'm sure I said it very I don't know, what I remember saying is Greg kissed me, and she said, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. And we just kept walking. And so if, I really used to have this, oh, why didn't she say you should go to the police or anything? But really, I don't know that I was ready for it then, and I don't know if it would have happened. So all those things, I think they happened the way they were supposed to happen. I had told my dad about it a few years before we made the police report, so he wasn't surprised, at least when we went forward and went to the police. Both my parents were totally supportive of me going to the police, and my stepfather too. My stepfather was a lawyer, so he had a friend who was a court reporter, and she was so helpful at just navigating the legal system, because until you're in a trial, you kind of know a little bit about the legal system, but who you ask for what and how and when, and you can't be in the courtroom until after you testify. So things like that were interesting. So he put his wife on his testifying list or whatever, on his witness list, so that she couldn't be in to listen to all the victims' testimony. So there were just really interesting things like that made it I felt totally supported through the trial. And then when I wrote the book, my mom just is such a cheerleader for me. She's always just oh, you're so amazing. How do you do these things? But she read the book, and then my stepdad read the book, and then he offered to edit it for me. And so he did an edit on the book. I think my family, they do come from a different generation, and I don't know that they're ever going to feel the way we do about how we should do this, but they've been totally supportive of me, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, that old saying, they did the best they could with what they had. Sometimes that's irritating, but it is true, right?
It is true, and we're doing the best we can with what we have, and this is it. Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, I think as long as we keep saying to our kids, and you'll do better than me, we're okay. Just don't pretend.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to mess this up. I say that to him all the time.
Yes. Well, and in the midst of this just last few months, my dad has passed away. So he was the one person who had not read it. Thankfully, he had just visited. And I didn't have this in my hands yet, but I did talk to him about it. And I said, the book is done. It's coming really soon. You know, I don't need you to read it because it's not going to be fun for you. But if you want to read it, you can. And he said, you know, just like at the trial, Torey, he said, you asked me not to come and I didn't, but, you know, I would have if you wanted me to. So basically that was a really clear understanding. And yeah, it's been a really interesting intertwining of emotions with this and with that, because he did do the best he could. And I got to be surrounded by friends and family who loved me and sprinkle some of his ashes on the beach in North Carolina. And what I said was, you know, every parent tries to do better for their child than what they had. And he did not have the beach in North Carolina as a child, and he gave me that, you know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, if there was a block, and I don't think there was, but my grandfather died right before I went to the police the same year. And you know, you don't want to talk about this stuff in front of your grandfather at all, right? Like your grandfather does not need to know that you have a vagina, right? So partly, like, it was interesting, all the emotions that came along with my dad's passing. It also was this like little bit of freedom that, you know, he doesn't have to hear from his friends, I read your daughter's book, like, you know. So maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important to note. You know, I have a few people who are writing similar books right now, and it is a wild journey to watch them have this conversation with the people around them who are new to the conversation, don't know what to do, are scared for themselves, for this person. You know, it's like a whole, like you said, it's a 12-step program through the process of writing your book.
Yeah.
It helps you to find those places where things still need to be put into order in yourself, in your world, and in the world at large. So I'm really grateful that I got to be part of your journey and get to be, because I'm not going anywhere. I can't wait to see what this all turns into. So unfortunately we have to end this. It's like, how did an hour go by already? I don't know how it happened, but I would love for you to share some of your like best tips for people who are on this journey or know someone who's on that journey. Like, how do they, you know, this is called the mindful messenger. Like, how do you stay mindful? How do you keep paying attention when it's hard and you don't want to have these hard conversations and you don't want to do the hard work of, you know, going to yoga to get the energy out or whatever. So whatever you have to share.
Yeah. So one thing I would say is there's no such thing as damaged goods. Like, that's just not real. So no matter where you're at and no matter what you feel like you need to do or should do or somebody's telling you to do, like, find the things that light you up and make you feel good and do them. So it doesn't have to be talk therapy. It doesn't have to be yoga. It doesn't have to be massage, but find what you feel good doing and do more of that. And then I think, you know, just owning the truth of it. So being able to say I was sexually violated, like, it took me a long time to say that. But for someone who has been raped, I think being able to say, like, I was raped, just speaking those words out loud is a really good first step. And then, you know, if and when it is appropriate, making a police report is an amazingly freeing thing, because it takes that pressure of what if he's hurting somebody else or what if she's hurting somebody else off of you to some degree. But trusting yourself too, and trusting your gut and how your body feels about something, listen to it. You know, I mean, if you're stuck in a place where you're just feeling miserable all the time, there's a reason for that, and you need to do the work, because if you don't do the work, you will be stuck in that place forever, and nobody deserves that, and it wasn't your fault. So,
and it was a big deal.
And it was a big deal, exactly. And even if society is telling you it wasn't, like, keep talking about it. It was a big deal if it made you feel bad.
Yep. Well, my friend, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for doing like years of hard work to be able to put such a gift out into the world. And I'm looking forward to hearing feedback on this interview and hearing people's response to your story. And hopefully it'll help you catalyze some action in the direction of prevention. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It
yeah,
has
you're
been an
welcome.
amazing experience working with you and putting this thing out.
Yeah,
You have a huge talent.
total honor.
Yes. Thank
Total
you.
honor. So thanks to our audience for listening. Please share your thoughts. Please share the interview because we need to have this really hard conversation a lot more. So please do this and share. And I want to thank our sponsor, sitechisel.com, for their amazing support and their offer to give my audience 10% off their services with the code Mindful10. And that's it. That's a wrap for today. Thank you, friend.
Thank you.